What if you could actually see how much things are changing? Not just guess, but know for sure. That's what percent of change does, and we are breaking it down right now. I would like you to imagine that you're tracking something that changes over time, like your allowance, your favorite team's score, or how many likes your TikTok video gets. Percent of change is like a way to tell the story of how much something changed, but in a percentage form. It helps us understand if the change was big or small compared to the original amount. In this video, I'm going to introduce you the three type of percents. The first one is percent of increase. That is basically when things get bigger. So I would like you to think of it like, wow, my allowance went up, or my team scored more points. Basically, what that means is how much something grew or increased, expressed as a percentage of the original amount. Here is an example. If you had 10 stickers and now you have 15, that's a percent of increase. You are figuring out what percentage of the original 10 stickers the extra 5 stickers represent. The other type of percent is percent of decrease. That is basically the opposite when things get smaller. I would like you to think about it like, oh no, my allowance went down. Or my team scored fewer points. Basically what it means, it's how much something shrank or decreased as a percentage of the original amount. Here is an example. If your favorite player had 20 points last game and only 15 points this game, that's a percent of decrease. You are finding what percentage of the original 20 points the 5-point drop represents. Last but not least, the percent of error. That is basically when you guess wrong, but it's totally fine. So I would like you to think about it like, I tried to guess how many candies were in a jar, but it was a little off. Basically what it means is how far off your guess was from the actual amount, shown as a percentage of the actual amount. Why is this helpful? Well, basically because it helps us see how accurate your estimate was. And it's used in science, math, and lots of other areas. Something important that I would like you to remember is that percent of error is always compared to the actual or the correct value. Now, I'm going to be showing you different situations that are examples of percent of increase, percent of decrease, or percent of error. I would like you to pause the video every time that I read the situation so you can try to find out what type of percent it is. Let's see. A sports highlight video had 5,000 views on its first day. By the end of the week, it had 12,000 views. Please pause the video and try to think about, is this a percent of change that is increasing, decreasing, or percent of error? Very good. This was an example of percent of increase, as the sport highlight video at the beginning was 5,000, but then it went up to 12,000 views. Here is another example. A volleyball player had 800 followers before a big tournament. After the tournament, they had 650 followers. Please pause the video and try to think. Is this an example of percent of decrease, increase, or error? This is a clear example of percent of decrease, as the player at the beginning had 800 followers, but then after the tournament, only 650 followers. A funny sports meme on TikTok had 30,000 likes. The creator predicted it will get 25,000 likes. Pause the video and try to think. Is this an example of increase, decrease, or error? It's an example of percent of error. A basketball team won 70% of their games last season. This season, they have won 85% of their games. Pause the video and try to think. Is this a situation where the percent is increasing, decreasing, or there is an error? This is an example of a percent of increase, as he got 70% in their last season, but now in this season, they got 85%. A student's athlete's Snapchat story had 400 views after a win. After a loss, it had 200 views. Pause the video and think. This is an example of decrease because at the beginning, this student had 400 views, but now it only had 200 views. A sports news tweet got 1,500 retweets in the first hour. 2 hours later, it had 1,200 retweets. Pause the video and think about, is this a situation of increase, decrease, or error? Exactly. It's a percent of decrease. As you can see at the beginning, the tweet got 1,500 retweets, but then 2 hours later, only 1,200 retweets. A live stream of a soccer game had 2,000 viewers at halftime. By the end of the game, it had 3,500 viewers. Pause the video and think about, is this an example of increasing, decreasing, or error? Yes, this is an example of increase. A fantasy football player predicted they will score 120 points in a week. They actually score 100 points. Pause the video and try to think. This is a percent of error. A sports podcast had 1,000 listeners in its first episode. By the 5th episode, it had 1,800 listeners. Pause the video and try to think if this is an example of increase, decrease, or error. Yep, you got that right. This is an example of increase, as at the beginning, the first episode only had 1,000 listeners, but then in the 5th episode, it had 1,800 listeners. A school announced a sports event and expected 500 shares. The post received 600 shares. So pause the video and try to think about, is this an example of percent of increase, decrease, or percent of error? Exactly. This is an example of percent of error, as at the beginning, they thought that they were going to expect 500 shares, but then at the end, they actually got 600 shares. Now that you understand different situations where percent of decrease, percent of increase, and error are involved, I'm going to show you the formulas for each one of the percent. So make sure that you have a pencil and a notebook or a scrap of paper so you can pause the video and try to find out by yourself. This is a formula for percent of increase. You need to subtract the new amount minus the original amount and divide it by the original amount. So let's take a look at this. It says, find the percent of change from 40 hours to 50 hours. Please notice that 40 hours is the original amount. That's your starting point. While 50 hours is the new amount. That's the ending point. So let's try to use the formula to find out the exact percent on this situation. All right, so my percent of increase formula is basically telling me to subtract my new amount, which is 50, minus my original amount, which was 40, and then I need to divide it my original amount, which is 40, all right? As you know, 50 minus 40 is 10. And then you need to divide 10 divided by 40, which is 0.5. But as you know, we need a percent. So you need to shift the decimal point 2 spaces to the right. And that became 25% of increase. Now I would like you to pause the video and try to do this example by yourself. Very good. So basically, the new amount is 65 people. That's my ending point, all right? Minus my original amount, that was 57 people. But then I need to divide that by my original amount, which is 57. 65 minus 57 is 8. And then when you get to divide 8 by 57, you will get 0.14 and other digits. But for the sake of this activity, I'm going to leave it into only 2 digits after the decimal point. So then I need to shift my decimal point to spaces, 1 and 2. And this becomes 14% of increase. Pause the video and try to find the percent of change from 50 cookies to 80 cookies. So my new amount is 80 cookies. That's what I end up having. My original amount was the amount of cookies that I started with. So in this case, it's 50. And then I need to divide by my original amount, which is 50. As you already know, 80 minus 50 is 30. And 30 divided by 50 is equals to 0.6. Remember that you need to shift the decimal point to spaces to the right, 1 and 2. And here you have an invisible 0. So it is 60% of increase. There you go. Now, we're going to be talking about how to find the percent of decrease. So here's the formula. Original amount minus the new amount divided by the original amount. So here it says, find the percent of change from 20 days to 12 days. Remember, the original amount, it's always your starting point, all right? So my original amount in this case is 20. Minus 12 days, that is my new amount or my ending point. And there, my original amount is 20. So 20 minus 12 is equals to 8 out of 20. That is equals to 0.4. You need to shift the decimal point to spaces and add the 0. So it is 40% of decrease. So pause the video and try to find the percent of decrease on this situation. Very good. In October, the average temperature was 53 degrees Fahrenheit. In November, the average temperature was 37 degrees Fahrenheit. What was the percent of change from October to November? So my original amount, I started with this temperature. So it is 53 degrees Fahrenheit minus my new amount that it was in the next month, 37 degrees. But my original amount was 53 degrees. So if you subtract 53 minus 37, you get 16. And then when you divide 16 by 53, you will get 0.30. Then you shift the decimal point to spaces, 1 and 2, and that's how you end up with 30% of decrease. Pause the video and try to do this exercise by yourself. In this case, you need to find the percent of change from 3.2 miles to 2.4 miles. So again, this is your original amount, your starting point. So I'm going to use my original amount first, 3.2, minus my new amount that was 2.4. Divided by my original amount, that is 3.2. And then when you subtract 3.2 minus 2.4, you will get 0.8 out of 3.2. That is equals to 0.25. You need to shift the decimal point 2 spaces to the right, and that's how you get 25% of decrease. Remember that the percent of error is basically how much you predicted something and how off was your guess. So here it says, you predicted that your favorite basketball player would score 25 points in the game. However, he only scored 18 points. What was the percent of error in your prediction? So in this case, the formula for percent of error is equals to the amount of error divided by the actual amount. But I would like you to take a look at how you get the amount of error. Basically subtracting the larger amount by the smaller amount, and that's how you get the amount of error. All right? So let's try to find out the amount of error in this situation. So the larger amount in this case will be 25 points. And the smaller amount will be 18 points. But my actual amount in this case is 18 because that's the amount of error that he actually scored, 18. All right? So now I have 25 minus 18, which is 7, and my actual amount, which is 18. So 7 is the amount of error, okay? And then when I divide 7 by 18, I will get 0.38. But in this case, it's a repeating decimal, which means that there are eights, a bunch of 8 in here. But in this case, as you need to only shift the decimal point 2 spaces, 1 and 2, you will get 38.8, and then the bar notation on top, percent of error. Try to do this one by yourself. All right, so here it says, Kendrick Lamar announced his new album. You guess it will get 2 million streams on its first day. The actual number of streams was 1.6 million. What was your percent of error in your prediction? So let's see the amount of error that is calculated by subtracting larger amount and smaller amount. So in this case, it will be 2 millions minus 1.6 divided by the actual amount that was 1.6. If you subtract 2 millions minus 1.6, you get 0.4 divided by 1.6. 0.4 divided by 1.6 is actually 0.25. When you shift the decimal point 2 spaces to the right, you'll find out that the percent of error in your prediction was 25%. Pause the video and try to do this one by yourself. A skincare influencer claims a new face mask reduces acne by 80%. You try it and you found out that it only reduced by 65%. What is the percent of error in the influencer's claim compared to your experience? So in this case, I'm going to subtract my larger amount, that is 80%, minus my smaller amount, that is 65%, divided by the actual amount. In this case, the actual amount will be 65 because in the question it's telling me what is the percent of error in the influencer's claim compared to your experience. So in my experience, it only got 65% reduce of acne, not 80%. So when you subtract 80 minus 65, you will get 15. And now you need to divide 15 by 65 divided by 65. And you will get that is 0.230. And other number, but it's okay if you leave it like this. So now I'm going to shift my decimal point 2 spaces to the right. And it got me 23% of error. Please pause the video and try to do this one by yourself. All right, so in this case, you estimated that a limited edition pair of sneakers will resell for $300. When they actually went on this resale market, they sold for $375. So what was the percent of error in your estimated resale price? So let's see. My larger amount is $375 and my smaller amount is $300. But the actual amount on this resale price was $375. If I subtract 375 by 300, I get 75. 75 divided by 375 will give you 0.20. Don't forget that you need to show me the percent. So you need to rewrite this decimal as a percent by shifting the decimal point 2 spaces to the right. And this will be 20% of error. All right, guys, that was it for today. I hope that you learned everything that you needed to learn about percent of change. See you next time.